Welcome to everybody to this third webinar hosted by the D Group on REDD+ and forest governance. Our topic today is empowering rural and Indigenous women in forest-related climate actions. My name is Amanda Bradley. I'm a gender specialist here at FAO in the REDD+ team, and I'm also a co-moderator of the D Group. Today we have a very exciting and fast-paced agenda with two featured speakers, two expert commentators, and an open floor for your comments and questions. First, I'd like to turn over briefly to our technical wizard, Alice, to explain how the Zoom tool works for those of you who aren't familiar.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and let me join Amanda in welcoming you today. As I've said before to those who connected early, any technical question or if you would like to present yourself, please do so in the chat. You will not be able to speak, but you will have two channels to communicate with us. So any presentations or comments or technical questions, use the Zoom chat. And you will also, in the middle bottom of your screen, find a little box that is called Q&A. If you have any technical questions on the presentations, so any issue you would like one of the presenters or commenters of this webinar to address, you should type it there in the Q&A. So they receive notifications and they can either already answer to your question in written, or they will do it later during the Q&A after the presentations. My name is Alice, and any technical question or during this webinar, just send it to me through the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. I'm not sure what we would do without you. Very much appreciated. So next, I'd like to run through the agenda, and then we're going to have a short quiz for everybody, just for fun. So our first speaker today is going to be Patricia M. Christensen, a senior gender, agricultural systems and forest landscape specialist with the World Bank. She's going to set the scene for us with an introduction to the topic of gender and empowerment of rural women for climate change. And then next, we're going to hear from FAO's own Carla Caceres, a project officer based in our Honduras office. Carla has been responsible for monitoring and evaluation of our Pro-Clima project, a FAO project that's financed by Global Affairs of Canada. The Pro-Clima project aims to empower women for climate action in the forestry sector by strengthening their business capacities. We'll hear more about this in a minute. Carla has degrees in integrated watershed management and in forestry, and she has a professional experience also with the National Institute for Forest Conservation and Development in Honduras. So thank you both for being with us as presenters. Following these presentations, we'll have two expert commentators to share their reflections. First, Sileni Ramirez, the Gender Justice Manager from the Rights and Resources Initiative, and then Elizabeth Eggerts, the Gender and REDD+ Specialist for UN REDD based at UNDP. So thanks also to them. Also in the room with us here, I have my colleague Serena Fortuna next to me, who's a REDD+ Forestry Officer at FAO, and she's going to do a short wrap-up at the end. And then also with us is Francesca Felicani Robles, a forestry officer specializing in REDD+ legal matters, and who is also a co-moderator of the D Group, along with another colleague, Ken Rosenbaum, who volunteers with the D Group from Washington, D.C., and who's also on the line with us. Thank you. So before, just to get us started, I'd like to start with a short quiz, just for fun. Alice is going to help me by posting these questions on the screen, just 4 short questions, and then you'll be able to choose multiple choice, your favorite answer. So the first question, The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women was adopted by the UN General Assembly in what year? So please choose the year you think is correct. Not sure when the answers are.
Can the participants see the questions on their screen? They should be able to see the questions on your screen. Can you see them in FAO?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes, so somebody found it. So you have to click on it actually to give your replies.
Okay, the questions are answering.
Oh, they're moving on with the next question.
You can read the other questions too, no?
Shall we go on?
They're already going on.
After giving the answer, or?
No, you can read all the questions they're answering.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at my screen. Great, thank you, everybody.
So there's 4 questions, and
Yeah, I'll read through the next few questions. So this question number 2, to date, CEDAW has been ratified by how many countries? Again, 4 choices. The third question, which sustainable development goal aims to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls? And finally, according to Landesa, worldwide, what % of landowners are women? So I'll just give you another minute or two to log in your answers.
Yeah.
I guess when you see how many are for different, they can't see the answers.
They can see the answers, yeah. They can see the percentage.
everyone can see the...
Okay, that kind of gives you a hint. Okay, so I think we're ready for the answer. So the number 1, the convention was adopted by the General Assembly in 1979.
So the majority of people answered that, right?
Yes, well done, everybody. Yeah. Second question, the number of countries that have ratified is 189. So actually more than most people anticipated. The top number there, 189. Implementation may be another question, but a lot of countries have adopted. And the third question on the Sustainable Development Goals, everyone did very well on this. Number 5 is correct. And finally, the last question. This is maybe a bit tougher, and the answers are quite spread. The correct answer is 15% C. So thank you, everyone, for your participation in the quiz. I hope it wasn't too hard. Without further ado, I'd like to now turn over to Patty for her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, and let's see if the sharing works. Okay, is everyone seeing the presentation?
Works fine on my end.
Great. Good, well, thank you, and hello, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to speak. And I'm quite overwhelmed and happy to see the high level of interest from, what I think is a very important topic, and from so many of you all over the world. So that's really great. And I look forward to hearing about other people's experiences. So my background is actually in agricultural systems, rural livelihoods, landscapes, and gender research. And how to make this research have greater impacts. I lived in and worked in Africa for many years. And for the last few years, I've been working for the program on forests at the World Bank. And this has been about looking at how to better use existing knowledge on gender issue in forest landscapes to inform and improve forestry and agroforestry projects, programs, and investments. And this is about a landscape level. And a shift to the landscape level, I think, has been important. Okay. So why should we worry about gender in relation to forest landscapes? Well, we undertook a review in the Pro4 program, and we found that there's at least 16 types of gender gaps that are absolutely relevant and highly relevant to forest projects. And when I say gender gaps, I'm referring to disproportionate differences between men and women in terms of things like participation in forest management, forestry and land tenure security, access to, use of, control over, benefits from forest landscapes, and the list goes on. And I would point you to the working paper called Taking Action on Gender Gaps in Forest Landscapes for more information on those gaps and more examples. But basically the bottom line on why is that addressing the key gender gaps relevant to particular places, circumstances, initiatives will enhance their effectiveness. And this will actually lower the risk for investors funding these types of efforts. And those are key arguments that I think we have to keep making. Now, Pro4's gender program has been producing practical guidelines that try to outline ideas for forest landscape related project activities and program actions that are gender responsive. And this has been in partnership with many others working on similar issues. In particular, C4, the Center for International Forestry Research, has been working with many other groups from researchers, implementers, investors, looking at these issues. And they formed something called the Gender Constituency within the Global Landscapes Forum, which is led by C4 and is reaching hundreds of thousands of people. So I encourage you to check out the Global Landscapes Forum. Many of you should be interested in what they're doing. Now, I think these and other researchers and implementing partners are actually really on the cutting edge of gender and forest landscape issues. And they're, for example, pushing the envelope a little further between just talking about men and women and really looking into how other factors such as age, ethnicity, wealth, status, etc., are very important determinants of behavioral change. And the gap between asset poor and asset rich women, women of one ethnicity versus another in any given village might actually be as large as or larger than the gap between the average woman and man in the same location. So which raises the issue, what can be done about these types of actions? What can be done to address these gender gaps? And to do this, we actually took a look at what is being done and written up in REDD plus gender action plans. And when we were doing this review, we had 7 countries to look at: Mexico, Ghana, Uganda, Cameroon, Nepal, Vietnam, and Guatemala. And these countries were producing these REDD plus gender action plans. And so the questions are, what are the needs that they are expressing in these gender action plans? And what kinds of actions do they want to see taken to address them? And you'll see that, for example, capacity gender gaps. There's a request for much more technical information, trainings on a wide range of topics to address gaps in access to resources, markets, employment and income opportunities. There's a focus on collective action and support to groups, making sure that these groups are more inclusive than they have been, for example, forest user groups. To address the participation and benefit gaps, they've been looking at rules, targets, quotas aimed at more equitable participation. Sorry, next one. They are looking for joint signatures on contracts and certificates, such as land, tree, forest rights certificates. And these are very important. And I'm not going to talk much more about rights. One of our other speakers, Sileni, I think will talk a little bit more about that. The credit and financing gaps loom large. So new credit and financing mechanisms that target women's forestry and agroforestry related enterprise and groups are absolutely key. And I point out to one innovative one called the Women's Empowerment Standard, W+. And I don't have time to go into it, but I encourage people interested to look at wplus.org to learn about that. And they emphasize the importance of having earmarked budgets for project activities that explicitly target and help close gender gaps. Another example of a targeted program towards women and indigenous peoples is the World Bank's Climate Investment Fund's dedicated grant mechanism, the DGM program. And we're currently looking at how well it is reaching and benefiting women in several countries. And in Mexico, there's an interesting case that the DGM has supported some, I think, quite innovative behavioral science-based gender analysis and action research that's actually testing interventions that are target women. And this is aimed at increasing participation and benefits from government forest and natural resource management projects in Mexico. And of course, the problem was there were no women or very few women involved, and they were really aiming to change that. So the initial research found that there's many constraints and issues that our women are facing. And they're at each step sort of towards active participation and obtaining benefits from forest landscape programs, for example. And this is about hearing, that's the smallest peak of the mountain on the left in the diagram, hearing about the program, aspiring to apply, the next peak of the higher mountain, inquiring about the program, applying, and then actually obtaining benefits from the program, the highest peak of the mountain on the right in this diagram. And these constraints include things like status quo bias and traditional gender roles. In the first valley there, between aspiring and acquiring, issues of lack of self-efficacy and social norms. In the next step, between inquiring and applying, inaccessible institutions, and also a lack of, and then finally getting the benefits, a lack of social status. And I'm forgetting the last one there because it's covered. Anyway, it begs the question, so what do you do then to address these different types of gaps in the stages to getting benefits from projects and programs? And I can tell you what they're now testing in Mexico. They're testing some targeted communication efforts on radios, workshop, posters, flyers, and they've designed feedback mechanisms through SMS and hotlines to reach potential female applicants for forest-related program. And they're also testing if framing the materials based on the insights they learned from the study and sending motivational SMS messages can actually reduce some of those identified barriers. So basically, what is communicated matters and how. So here they saw it needed to address social norms, self-identity issues, and simplify things as much as possible, and include a call to action, actually, to inspire women to get more involved. And then where these things were communicated mattered. So putting these posters in places where women go regularly, for example, was something they're doing. And they're using checklists, text messages, and reminders. So they're making extra efforts to help women go through all the steps to apply for and ultimately benefit from these programs. So what are these examples and this work we've been doing sort of lead us to? What are some of the key messages for empowering those that are traditionally less empowered in these landscapes? First, I would say that more action research and testing of gender responsive efforts or approaches are needed. There's very few of actual testing going on, although I'd stand to be corrected from some of you that are out there, and I think in REDD+, there's definitely efforts being made to do this. And I think from my perspective, it's important to pay attention, and project teams and project designers to think about these linking knowledge with action principles that we know. We know that engaging in strategic partnerships and collaborations are key. And here it's about the gender partnerships. Who is bringing the gender knowledge and work to the table? Trying innovative two-way communication strategies to reach less empowered individuals and groups. Using thoughtful, inclusive engagement processes, and again, timing, location matters. Employing learning-based targeted capacity strengthening approach. And I would say to project teams starting, and particularly in the design stage, it's really important to go out on a limb and articulate a gender theory of change with your implementing partners. What are the outcomes and behavioral changes you are seeking? Who's and how? And this is easy to say, and it's not so easy to do. But if you do it in the early stages, it really leads to more effective projects and programs. So this has been a sort of quick overview. For more information and the resources I've talked about, here's the link. And this presentation and recording, I believe, will be shared. And I wanted to leave you with a few other key resources from some of the partners like FAO and C4. And I really want to thank you all for taking the time to participate. Many of you joining online have experience in trying to better reach, benefit, and empower women, Indigenous peoples, and others that are just traditionally less empowered in your own countries and regions. This is really important work. I really emphasize the need for it whenever I'm giving talks. And I hope that this has given you some ammunition, if you will, for when you're trying to convince your governments and others. And it'd be really good to hear about and also compile some of those experiences from all of you. So thank you for your time. Stop share, I believe.
Thank you so much, Patty. That's really great in helping us to set the scene, sharing some really practical strategies and examples from your long experience. Thank you so much. We're gonna keep moving and move to the next presentation from Carla with some country level experience in Honduras. And then after that, we'll have the commentators, and we'll also be able to share the presentations after the event as well as a video of the event. So everybody will be able to see some more of the details that way. And I just would also like to encourage the listeners to write your questions and comments in the Q&A screen on the Zoom tool, and we'll try to respond to those as we move along. So next, I'll turn it over to Carla. Thank you.
Webinar, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about a project which is called Empowerment of Women for Climate Action in the Forestry Sector of Western Region in Honduras, in short, PromoClima. So why PromoClima was designed? There are three main reasons that I'm going to mention. The first one is about the high rate of rural population in extreme poverty. Almost or about the 52% of this population most of this is in this region, in the western region in Honduras. Another reason is because Honduras also has a high rate of forest deforestation, and forest degradation, and this becomes in a high level of greenhouse events. As many of you know, Honduras is one of the most affected countries in vulnerability, environment speaking. Another reason is the weak of governance from local actors. So in the decision makings that the government made for the management of the natural resources, the forest resources. So the people who live in rural areas, they don't participate in this decision making. So this is one of the reasons why the project was designed. PromoClima has two main results or outcomes, as you prefer. The first outcome is to improve local governance in the management of forest resources. This is trying to involve local communities, the local governments, in the decision making, and also try to involve women and youth, and also indigenous people. And the second outcome or result refer to the economic empowerment of these people. People who work in their livelihoods is about to use the forest resources. So if the project, at the end of the project, is supposed to achieve or have an impact, and this impact is to improve quality of life of rural and indigenous women and youth whose livelihood depend on forest and agroforest resources. Also, the project will contribute to three sustainable sustainable development goals. The first one is is no poverty. Also will contribute to the number 5, gender equality, and number 13, climate actions. And in an indirectly way, will contribute to number 2, zero hunger, and number 8, good jobs and economic growth, and number 15, life and land. Who are the beneficiaries of the PromoClima projects? We have 2 levels. The direct beneficiaries are at least 60 forest and farm producer organizations, and also 2,000 women and youth. Those are the direct beneficiaries. Also, we have local government beneficiaries, and they are 12 municipalities, especially women municipalities offices and municipal environment units. Also, there are 3 Commonwealth or association municipalities or municipalities that are beneficiaries from the program. At institutional level, the project will beneficiate to National Women Institute, to the Forest Conservation Institute, the Minister of Environment, and the Presidential Office of Climate Change. I already mentioned that PromoClima is located in the western area in Honduras, but you have a picture here so you can have a better idea. So PromoClima will work with 3 Commonwealth or association municipalities. The first one is called Munasbar. And Munasbar has, the project will work in 3 municipalities. The second one is Mapance. The project will work in, or is working in 5 municipalities. And the third one is Cafec. And the project is working in 4 municipalities. Project achievement. I better call preliminary results because anyone who has worked in project knows better that the project will have achievement at the end of the project. So Promoclima is right now is in a midterm. So I'm going to talk about the preliminary results. The first one is development and management of geographical information systems. So the project has doing capacity building of women and youth of 12 municipalities, especially municipal environment and cadastral offices. In the use of management of geographic information system. But maybe you say, okay, it's just a training, but it's not that, because these people live in rural areas, so they don't have access to this technology. So the project made this training in order to facilitate data collection to these municipalities for a better management of watershed and forest resources. Also, the project already has a gender strategy. What for? Is to improve the governance, the increase the participation of rural communities, the women organization into the municipal dialogue structures, and of course, the objective of the project is to promote the economic empowerment of women and youth. So far, the project has identified 62 producers organization. I already said that the beneficiary, direct beneficiary are 60 organizations, but the project so far has identified 63. From these 53 organizations, the project will finance their business plans. And almost the 50% of these producers are women from these organizations. So I think we are in the correct way. The project also has working in access to markets. So which actions? First, agroecological fairs. The project has support to municipalities by doing these fairs. And what for? Well, to promote internal trade in the municipality, increase sales of the rural producers, of course, and offer to consumers fresh products at reasonable prices. From the total producers who participate in this agroecological fair, about the 46% were rural women producers. Right now, the project is giving some training in market analysis in development, because the people, the producers that are going to receive financing, they will have business plans. So they before has to be aware of what is a business plan, and that's why this is the training. So far, 41 producers organizations have received this training among the 12 municipalities and 3 Commonwealth, a group of municipalities. From these participating, 41 women from a total of 7 participants. So it's almost about the 53% of women and 52% of youth has participated in this training. So, and they are potential beneficiaries for financial of business plans. Last year, the project made a forum called Women Guardians of the Common House Dialogue Facing Climate Change. The object of this forum was to promote the recognition, not only women, not only youth, but also men, indigenous people, that work and live and use the natural resources, use the forest resources. So they want to take into account when government made decisions made. That's the main objective of this forum. And as a result of this forum, the rural community organization made a request to the government authorities. So who requests? The representative from water management boards and women organizations from these rural communities. To whom? To the authorities present in the forum. They were the institutions like Forest Conservation Institute, the Minister of Environment, and of course the local governments like municipal mayors. Why the request? They request to be supported politically and economically in order to protect the natural resources and of course the forest resources, to build capacity of the municipal environmental officers. So these communities are aware that the municipal offices have a weak governance. So they ask to these authorities to build capacity for these municipal offices, women offices, and environment municipal office. They also request more institutional presence in their communities because they feel they are working alone. And also they want government to create a public policy for the forestry and agricultural sector to incorporate economical and legal incentives to allow these community people to do sustainable development of agroforestry as a livelihood. So how the project managed is to get these preliminary results? Well, the project has a very good technical team. So they started by reviewing the municipal development strategy plans. So each municipality in Honduras has to have these plans, because if they don't have these plans, they won't receive any money from the government. So the people from the project review these plans in order to involve local communities, rural, youth, indigenous people in reviewing these strategic plans. Also, the project made an institutional diagnosis service to know the needs of these women municipal offices and municipal environment units in order to do a training to capacity buildings. After that, the project promote through workshop the integration of women in the municipal platforms. Also create a training program on legislation on gender equality. I need to mention that Honduras has many laws and most of them has the aspect of gender equality, but this part of the legislation is not known for many people. So this is the reason to create a training program. At the beginning of the project was made a self-assessment workshop to the Forest and Farm Producers Organization. This is to know their needs in order to create a training program to strengthen. And also, it's very important, the strategic alliance. So the project has made alliance to UNICEF to work with the children in schools the INAM is the National Women Institute. Another project presents in the area of the project that have common objectives. What are the challenges for the project? Well, we were talking about the challenge when the project is ended, when the project finished. So one of the challenges is the government institution integrate the participation of rural and indigenous women and youth in the decisions making. Making in the structures that are present. I mean, only the government take decisions about how to manage the forest resources, but the challenge is the government can include this local actor in this decision making. Another challenge is the municipal government, local government, strength institutional capacities in terms of gender equality and environmental. This is strengthening their municipal offices that we were talking about. Also, another challenge is women and men of rural communities are willing to adopt technology changes to reduce emissions and improve resilience and support sustainable livelihoods. So the project will give some new technologies to these people, to women, to youth, to indigenous people, to rural producers, but by the end of the project, they should adopt this technology and don't leave it. And another challenge is almost the same. Is all those people that I talk remain in learning and applying new technologies and good practices related to production, to forest and economic activities. Another one was about to adopt technology to reduce emissions, to take care of the forest. And this one is to adopt practices to keep with their business plan, for example. So this is the, sorry, this is the challenge that the project has. And if you have any question about the Promoclima Forest, please do not hesitate. And there is Adelaida Valentin, who is gender and indigenous people specialist, and myself, Carla Cáceres, I am monitor and evaluation officer. We can answer all your questions you have. So please don't hesitate, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Patty and Carla, for sharing your valuable insights related to gender considerations in the context of forest and climate change programs where you are being involved. In particular, Patty, it was very enriching to look at how to enhance effectiveness of forest landscape programs through gender-responsive actions, focusing on the collaborative work that has been developed between PROFOR and CIFOR, so looking at those tools, guidelines, and gap analysis. And in fact, it seems that certain actions to fill those gender gaps that you have mentioned also correspond to some of the prioritized actions in the context of the Promoclima Honduras projects. For example, accessing crediting and financial mechanisms, so that's one of the key elements of the Promoclima. The relevance of use of technology and innovative communication tools, and the need to improve accessing to markets, to local producer organizations led by women. But without adding more, I just want now to give the floor to our two expert commentators. So first, Selena, you're with us. Please share with all of the participants your fresh impressions and some observations regarding these two great presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
from this side of the world. Thank you for the presentation to Patty and Carla. On behalf of RI, we are very honored to be part of this conversation. RI is Rights and Resources Initiative, and we are a global coalition of organizations that advocate for the recognition of indigenous and community land rights in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And over the last years, we have been paying special attention to the rights of women within these community arrangements. With that, I'd like to start with some background to talk about the reflections that we have and to start the conversation. The first thing that we want to mention is historically, most rural lands were customarily owned and governed by indigenous peoples and local communities. And still today, up to 2.5 billion people still live within these community arrangements and directly manage and maintain 50% of the world's land. That leads me to my reflection number one. So from a conservation perspective, and research shows that these lands and resources are biologically more diverse and store more carbon. If you want to have more information about these studies, you can go to RI's website and you have access to all these studies. The second reflection that has resonated with the participant is to harness the community's climate change mitigation potential. We must ensure also the tenure rights of indigenous and rural women. This is not only about climate change, this is about food security, this is about poverty reduction, economic growth, and peace. Women are essential because tenure security is essential to both men and women for their livelihoods, for their personal agency, and for their well-being. It provides families and communities this resilience that they all need in the face of climate change and food shortages. However, the benefits of community tenure cannot fully realize if the rights of women are not secure. And I'm talking about access, I'm talking about control and management of those resources, and as well as meaningful participation in community forest management. Let's go to number three. Indigenous and rural women are key stakeholders in effective environmental management related to climate change mitigation. This is because women use, conserve, and value resources differently than men. I'm saying differently, not better, differently, because of the relationship with their lands and territories. As managers of community forests, women always bear, a lot of the times, bear the primary responsibility for gathering timber and non-timber products. They play a tremendous role in determining communities' diets, and also they are typically involved in the improvement and adaptation of local plants. They are also involved with seeds preservation. So with that, we can go to number four. The reflection is, with this in mind, having said that, there are serious implications of ignoring the power of women's tenure rights to achieve the climate-focused goals. Their livelihoods and economic agencies suffer, but also the sustainable management of forests that we all depend on to achieve these climate objectives. Let's talk a little bit about legal implications. Governments have yet to recognize women's tenure security as a powerful tool or strategy for climate change. In 2017, RI launched a comparative analysis across Africa, Asia, and Latin America on the laws regulating women's community forest. One of the key implications of the key findings was the women's rights to participate in community level governance, this is leadership and voting rights, received the lowest of adequate gender-specific legal recognition. This has serious implications because despite their contributions to community forest management and their increasing forest land-based responsibilities, if women do not receive this legal backing, they are unable to participate in community forest conservation. They cannot negotiate forest concessions and other interactions with private corporations. And finally, they cannot negotiate terms of the projects like REDD or receive equal rights or benefits that these projects are supposed to provide to all the members of the community. I had only 5 minutes and my time is up. I'm going to leave it there to give the floor to the second commentator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. That was really a good contribution to the discussion. So we'll now ask Beth to please share your views, observations, and also reflections on the topic. Thank you very much, Beth. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me still okay? Is the connection all right?
Yes, yes, perfectly well.
Okay, perfect. So I've turned on my video, so I hope it stays and it behaves okay. So first off, I just want to thank FAO colleagues. Thanks so much for hosting this webinar and for inviting me to share my thoughts and reflections, as well to the other presenters and the commentators. So I thank you for that as well. So I think first of all, I think what we've seen here today is there have been great experiences, knowledge, and good practices that have been shared that really highlight some of the key elements that I think can help guide our work and empower rural and Indigenous women and in climate action, be it adaptation or mitigation. And it's just really interesting to hear about the actual project-specific work going on the ground, because even though I work on this topic every single day, it's always I'm always learning from colleagues about other projects. So it's really encouraging to hear about these examples, and I'm really interested to hear what all of the participants in this webinar can also share, so we can learn from one another. Because I really feel like it's crucial that sharing such experiences is really how we're going to go beyond this business as usual to really have the transformational impact we need to see incorporating gender and climate action. And a lot of times I think we can kind of get in a rut and get in just kind of in the way that we do things, and we need to kind of think outside the box to really kind of see the action we need to see and the progress we need to see in climate action. And I just want to highlight too, so working on this topic in UN REDD, we've seen similar gaps, and we've also been using similar actions to address those gaps in our own work and that we've talked about here today. So it's really encouraging, it's really enforcing to see that even though we all work in sometimes maybe in different aspects, perhaps different thematic areas within climate change, that there are these constant reoccurring themes that we still need in gaps that we need to address in our work. And so I don't really want to, all the points raised have been fantastic today. So there's only one point that I think maybe just to add to discussion here, which has been highlighted, but maybe I've just over the years have seen it play such a crucial role, and sometimes it's such a crucial thing to pay attention to, but can so often be forgotten, is the fact that we need to actually consult with rural and Indigenous women about what needs they have and what barriers they see to their empowerment and their involvement in any kind of climate action, because they're the experts and they're the ones to give us the best advice on what they need to overcome those hurdles so they can participate and engage and be involved in such action. And it's really kind of using this bottom-up approach that we need to use to kind of, I think, to start to see that more transformational impact. And this is exactly what they've been telling us for, I would say, quite a few years as well. So in this spirit, just to highlight, in UN REDD in 2017, we were developing a methodological brief on gender, and it's available in English, Spanish, and French. So I'll be happy to send it to participants here after the workshop. I'll work with Amanda, so maybe we can send it out with some of the materials. But when we were drafting this publication, which was to identify concrete entry points in REDD Plus to integrate gender and concrete actions that can be taken and kind of go beyond just the blanket guidance, we made sure to consult with Indigenous and rural women so that what we were advising and providing guidance on was actually addressing their needs and was anchored to their realities on the ground and what they saw they needed to move forward. And some of the points they raised to really kind of help empower them to be involved. Some of the things discussed here. Rights was a huge issue. Sometimes women don't even know their rights, what they are allowed, what they can and what they can ask for. They, being part of forest user groups or how to be engaged. So those types of things. So that's what we saw, and it was really helpful to hear from them. And I think that's it's really constructive to see here that what we heard from, or what we've been hearing through women over the years, and you and REDD, about what they need is what's been, all the points have been reinforced here in this webinar today. So that's great to see. Just because the women, rural Indigenous women, are really in the driver's seat. They're the ones that know what they need, and they're also going to be more involved and stay involved if they see that their needs are being met and that their voices are being heard, because they're the best place to know what they need to improve their livelihood and to help them in terms of the resources that they depend on and how to preserve those in the face of climate change. So, and this all helps to create this idea of ownership, which is so crucial, as so many of us know here, how crucial that is to any kind of project's sustainability and success. So I'll stop there. I think my time's up. So I just thank you all for being involved in this. It's been a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Thank you very much. It was extremely useful, to have also your very spontaneous, impressions. And you made also some good questions related to that. I think we can pass to the, let's say, that's the next session. And now what we would like to have is to have like a small session of questions and answers with the panelists. So I tried to group the 4 questions that were elaborated when Patty was presenting. So I'm sure that those questions are addressed to Patty. So Patty, that's for you. So the first question is how to identify criteria to differentiate between 16 gender gaps. And how did you proceed to find out those gender gaps? They really reflect the worldwide situation of gender issues in the forest sector. Well, the third one is how to break rules. Even sometimes when we want to involve women in the forest-related projects and activities, but they don't want, since it's not part of their culture. So we have some questions related with those gender gaps that have been identified, Patty. And please, can you tell us a bit something more on that? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, great questions. Thank you for sending them in. Let me start with the second one. How do we try to go about synthesizing these gender gaps? And it was from a review of the literature, and there's a lot of good papers and work that's out there that's been looking at gender gaps and actions in the context of REDD+. So there's reviews and studies that have looked across REDD+ initiatives. And also being at the bank, I was able to look at a wide range of World Bank projects and take a look at what kinds of gaps were showing up. Now, when you synthesize things, you run the risk of suggesting that these gaps exist everywhere or the same gaps are found in all places. And of course, that's not true. They're quite specific but I thought it was useful to pull out the examples because it's quite remarkable how many places you do find similar gender gaps. And this relates to actually a question that was further down about, can you deal with gender gaps or gaps between women and men in the same way as constraints being faced by Indigenous people, for example? Which is an excellent question because I sometimes talk about, well, in relation to women and IPs, for example. And I asked the lead Indigenous peoples representative at the World Bank this question, and he had an interesting answer. He said, no, it's not necessarily right to assume that the issues are always similar and the actions should be similar. On the other hand, it's not wrong in many circumstances. And he said, you know, we've made a lot of progress in saying it's unacceptable gender inequality across the globe. But it's equally unacceptable for an Indigenous group to say, well, this is my culture, so this is the way we do things, so, you know, there it is. And I thought that was very nice to hear coming from him and not a sort of privileged white woman, if you would. So I think, and that ties into the question, you know, how do we break the rules? And I think the other speakers and Beth highlighted this absolute need to consult with people. And it's so powerful bringing people together in structured dialogues that are inclusive. You talk to women separately than men in some instances, you bring them together because absolutely they know the issues and they are the ones that need to solve them. What I like to do when I bring together lists of actions and things is to just talk about them as being illustrative ideas, because it's always nice to learn from what's working in other places and to give people new ideas. Oh, we hadn't thought about doing, you know, technical training on leadership for women. It just hadn't occurred to us, you know, but that would be very powerful because we've got groups, but there's no leaders that are women in these groups. So things like that. I mean, so that power of consulting. And the criteria to differentiate between the gaps, I think it's important that there's a lot of overlaps, and when we tried to pull them out and give them names, it was more just as an organizing thing and again, that I don't want to give the idea that these gaps are universal and everywhere. It's very location and circumstance specific. So again, consulting and talking and figuring out that gender analysis as the first stage is absolutely critical, I'll say.
Thank you very much, Patty. I think your answers have been really comprehensive. Thank you very much. I have here also a question for Silene, and the question would be it's from Ari. How to secure women or community land rights where land legislation gives access to the resources, but not to land, which remains the property of the state? Maybe, Silene, that's a tricky question.
Not an easy one.
Yes.
Thank you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Okay. Okay. Okay, I need to find it again. Sorry.
Well,
okay. How to secure women or community land rights when land legislation gives access to the resources but not to the land, and when in those cases the land remains the property of the state. So when there is this gap.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's actually an excellent question. And that's why when we talk about tenure security, we talk about the bundle of rights. It's not only access, it's also control and management of those resources. So that's how you measure when tenure security is actually secured. So it has to be within the perspective of a bundle of rights, because women often have access to the resources, but don't have the ability to participate in decision making. So the study that I mentioned, Power and Potential, provides a specific information on how to address those gaps. It is also a good baseline to talk about the SDG 5, about legal frameworks to protect women's rights. So that's one of the implications, like to see the whole aspect of secure rights as a holistic approach, not just one section over the other.
Thank you very much. And maybe one question for Carla, very concise. So, Carla, you mentioned and you showed to us the complexity, in the context of Promoclima to deal with 3 different components. But you also demonstrated the strong level of commitment that you have reached until now at local level by engaging different kinds of stakeholders. And you have already progressed towards, trying to engage women in different project activities. So, Carla, can you just please mention to us what was, the approach you have been adopting in order to engage those very valuable local stakeholders, such as the man communities, such as the local producer organizations led by women, and the municipalities?
Well, I think the approach is more like to involve people, local people, rural communities, people in the construction of the strategic plans from municipalities. This is the main important point for the project, because from this, beginning from this, so they will appropriate from the what is going to do the municipalities in the areas, and they are part of these plans. I mean, the government will take them into account to make decisions making that communities is, they are going to ask for. They are going to ask for involve them in the decisions making, in the management of the natural resources, the forest resources. The communities, rural communities, they live from these resources. So they want to be part of this decision making. Another approach is these people make part of these business plans. So they can use also the resources they have in their communities, but also they can have an economic income. So I think the approach is more like to be part of these structures that take decisions together with the government.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carla. Thank you very much. It's always enriching to have some fresh thoughts from someone who is based in Gracias, in Honduras, in the field, and works every day close to local stakeholders and rural people. So thank you very much. I think now, to respect our schedule, we can go to the next session. It will be very short, actually. And it's just a poll on future topics. So we are kindly asking to all the participants to please helping us in improving and letting us know about your needs for future webinars. So for that, what we did is just to facilitate this task, we have identified like 5 topics, and the last one would be, one suggestion from your side. And we will kindly ask you to please select up to 2 of those topics, which could be, the subject for future webinars that we are aiming to organize here in collaboration with our partners. So the first topic could be benefit sharing, emission reductions titling, or carbon rights in the context of REDD+. I think you can see on the screen, right, the poll. So you can, of course, click and choose on the one you prefer. The second one would be REDD+ nesting and carbon offsetting mechanisms. The third one would be human rights-based approach in the context of REDD+ initiatives. The fourth would be climate change and forestry legislation in support to REDD+. The fifth one would be adopting a landscape approach to strengthen forest and REDD+ governance. And finally, please give us your suggestions. Take your time. I think it can be easily done. It's a click. You can choose 2 topics and give us your suggestions. Thank you very much.
You can write suggestions in the chat.
And suggestions can be written in the chat, please. We will record everything and we will keep all the information from the Q&A box, from the chats. So even if some of the questions have not been yet answered, we will do it later on in the context of the D group on REDD+ and forest governance. I guess most of you are already members, or if you're not yet a member, please register to the D group. So we'll be able to follow up a bit on what remains to be discussed in the context of this topic. Thank you very much. I think which one? The first one.
Difficult to choose. Eh?
Yes, it's not easy, right? What do you say, Marie? You can see better than I. I'm a bit short-sighted. But maybe the last one, I would say, or the first
the
one.
Last one. The last one
the
is
landscape
58.
approach is getting quite a lot of votes,
Yes.
but also the benefit sharing, no? So
Yeah, right.
definitely with the additional votes that we receive through the D group, we'll take a nice selection of
And we can
which
prioritize.
webinar we'll have, exactly.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, since I was also entering in the mic, maybe I'll also continue with the mic.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. This is Serena Fortuna from the Forestry Department here in FAO, working the REDD+ team. I'll just steal a few minutes of your time for a very quick wrap-up, I think, of this, what has been a pretty exciting webinar. And again, thanks to my colleagues here who've been organizing this webinar. Sometimes when you participate, don't really realize how much work is behind the preparation of a webinar. Yes, right. Trust us, there is a lot. So we're really, really happy to know that you've been participating with us. Also, very nice thing, we started the webinar, we reached a peak of 100 people kind of following us, and we're 70 people now at the very end. So it's a very good kind of results of participation. Now, the rationale is very clear on why we need to kind of, as common action, we need to kind of be gender sensitive and include and enhance the role of women in all the work that we do. We've been receiving kind of a few nice reminders on how much this inclusion boosts the sustainable development. So that's also something very important, not just in the framework of the goals itself, or the sustainable development goals itself, but really on the ground, how this, for example, lower the risk for investors in the work, and also how this contributes to reducing emissions from deforestation, degradation, and overall kind of achieving the Paris Agreement. The different panelists and the different questions that we've had here also gave us some very nice examples and reflection on the point that yes, countries are advancing in this, but still maybe the kind of speed of inclusion of this needs to be accelerated maybe a bit, no? Extending in the number of countries that are really kind of embedding gender consideration into their work, and even in those countries maybe going really down on the ground. Some concrete actions that have been highlighted, Francesca also reminded about some before, but on what it was discussed before, I would like to highlight a couple of more, kind of the communication, where and how to communicate to women. That's very, very key. A call for action. Very often women would like to participate, but maybe they have different kind of responsibilities on their shoulder already. So the call for action is very important. And Patty was giving a very interesting suggestion and recommendation: include and embed in project gender theory of change. In our experience, this doesn't happen very often. So it's something that might be kind of transformational, really. When you prepare your project proposals, you really always have to put your theory of change, but why don't also embedding their theory of change specific on gender? How the project will, throughout the contribution, also bring some innovation on gender inclusion. The technology, as Francesca reminded us, and also as our colleagues from Honduras reminded us, it's important that those technology that we bring with the project for the women and for youth is really appropriate and the buy-in is there. Otherwise, we finish the project and the technology remain there. And very last reminder from Selena was on the bundle of rights. Indeed, when we work at country level, at local level, we need to look at the overall context. And so the bundle of rights is very important. It's very nice and very encouraging how this kind of presentations in the webinar reminded us about the big strength that the connection between women, youth, and the men can really bring into kind of reach the overall goal of eradicating poverty, bringing economics down to the local level, and connecting the scales from local level to institutional level. And a very nice kind of suggestion and reminder from Honduras, like from local level, remind the institutions that govern the municipality of the need of strengthen capacities, because that connection needs to be there. So very lastly, I think here we are many women around this table. Thanks, Tony, also for accompanying us as a male representative. We really appreciate that. Speakers and commentators also. I think we are all very kind of a proud and empowered group of women, but indeed this kind of empowerment needs to go down to the local level. Action on the ground. So we really hope that all the participants here, as well as all of the work that we do, really bring this message down to all the projects that are implemented on the ground. It's really a shared and common responsibility of all of us to kind of increasingly enhance the role of women on this development work and climate change mitigation adaptation work. So we count on all of you also to carry on doing this. And with this, I also thank again all the participants, the panelists, the commentators, and as Francesca mentioned before, if you didn't do so before, please join the REDD+ and Forest Governance discussion group. I'm sure that the link can be put in the chat for those of you who didn't have it yet.
Yes.
And with this, I think we can probably close this webinar on time and with a lot of very nice questions that were put. And as Francesca mentioned again, questions that were not answered through this kind of hour and a half, the hour and 15 minutes that we had, we will respond through the REDD+ and Forest Governance discussion group. So join there to see the answers. Thanks again to everybody, especially the panelists and commentators.
Thanks for the wonderful organization, you guys. Well done. And you know,